Hi everyone, welcome to this new video. We're in the week commencing the 30th of March. We're going to look at Bernstein in this first recording. I've got a few questions of yours already selected for that, and so let's tackle them. I'm going to share the screen a little bit with you, show you what I have in terms of questions, and here they are. So the first one here is one that I'd like to answer. I have some answer to it, but it's probably not a direct answer to the question. But Bernstein repeatedly talks about England. How influential was the monarchy in the United Kingdom successful in preventing the spread of communist ideals in the lower classes? I'd like to go a little bit broader than I don't know the answer to that second part of to that question. It's one. I do have sort of two. I want to split my answer into two parts, though. The two parts that I want to do this. Why is Bernstein talking about England at all? Right? That's sort of you don't really ask that in the question, but I do want to talk about that a little bit. England is at this time, at the time that Bernstein's writing, but also during the time of Marx and Engels. Engels especially is writing about England. Marx is living in England for a long time. So is Engels. They're living in England. Engels is there to manage his factory, right? A factory of his father's in Manchester. He writes. Eventually, he's going to write about the poverty and the degradation of the proletariat in Manchester. Is Engels. So England is really the forefront of the industrialization. It's where industrialization is happening rapidly. We're getting rapidly growing cities. We're getting a real strong establishment of a proletarian class along the lines that Marx and Engels have envisioned. What the heck? I'm stuck between envisioned and envisaged, but envisioned is what I really mean. So yeah, this is sort of the forefront. Britain's now at the forefront of economic development in that area. So that's why, right? That's not really the question that you asked, but I wanted to point that out. This is why we're talking about England mostly. This second part of your real question, the second part of my answer is a really particularly interesting one. And I haven't got much to say about the monarchy in particular, but there is an argument, a conservative argument, right? An argument that's made by Russell Kirk, for example, an American conservative writer, who thinks that the influence of conservatism in England is what prevented revolution. In a conservative mind, he talks about how the very first chapter, I think, when he's starting to discuss and sort of select, sort of justify his selection, I suppose, justify his selection of conservative thinkers. What he does is he chooses American and British, mostly except for Alexis de Tocqueville, who obviously has a very close relationship with the United States. But he chooses Britain and American conservatives as sort of the robust theory, right? The robust, enduring conservative theory. And his justification is that because since 1790, and he's writing in the 1950s, but because since 1790, there's been no revolution in either the United Kingdom or the United States, then we conclude from that, or Russell Kirk concludes from that, that conservatism, the brand of conservatism that existed in England and in the United States, influenced and descended from Burke's ideas, was strong enough to withstand and to prevent a revolution, right? And so, of course, when we talk about conservatism, we can link that to monarchy, right? To at least kind of Britain, right? We can't do much like that in the United States, but that's okay because the question's focusing on Britain. So, maybe it's these strong conservative ideas that are popular in England, that Burke has popularized, that the poets and writers, Samuel Taylor Coleridge. This is all Russell Kirk's argument. Actually, I'm just stealing it from him. Samuel Taylor Coleridge and Sir Walter Scott. Those guys. Wordsworth. These guys are popularizing and instantiating Burke's conservative ideas into popular British culture, which might have inoculated it against revolution. That's, again, a conservative Russell Kirk's argument about that. That would involve the monarchy in some sort of way. But what Bernstein is saying, right, and this is a great way to introduce what Bernstein's saying here. What Bernstein's saying, what we read from Bernstein, is that actually there's another reason perhaps why communism or Marxism, revolutionary socialism, let's call it that, because that's what Bernstein's sort of critiquing. Revolutionary socialism, the type of socialism that we talked about in class in that first week, where Marx talks about workers becoming immiserated, worse and worse conditions, realizing they have nothing to lose, and violently overthrowing the government. The reason why Bernstein says that that's not happening in the United Kingdom is that actually capitalism is bringing with it not a concentration of the wealth. And the reason why it's not bringing an ever more concentrated wealth, right? Wealth concentrated in ever fewer hands, which is what Marx is predicting. But Bernstein says that that's not happening. And perhaps the reason that that's not happening, thinks Bernstein, is because workers of the proletariat are organizing, and they are using trade unions and other methods. They're battling across the country in lots and lots of small, but non-violent, non-revolutionary ways, right? They're battling against the capitalists, right? And they're securing for themselves better wages, and they're securing for themselves better working conditions, right? He mentions the Factory Act, the factory laws that are introduced in England in the middle of the 19th century. So he says, look, this is evidence that actually what Marx predicted about the immiseration of the proletariat, it's not happening, right? Because workers are fighting for rights and for better working conditions, and they're winning. And actually we can see in Germany, he also mentions Germany in the article, which is also at the forefront of capitalism, of industrialization. It's Stuttgart, I think. He's pointing out one of the German cities in there, and he says, the evidence is from tax records, right, that actually the wealthy individuals, wealth is not being concentrated more and more in smaller numbers of people, but it's actually the numbers of people with high levels of capital is growing. So this is another reason why, and I'm saying here that this is preventing. This is another reason why. This is something else that's preventing the spread of communist ideals in the lower classes. That's not precisely, I suppose, but that's your question, but that's not exactly what I'm answering. What I'm answering is, why isn't there, what's preventing a socialist revolution, right? Revolutionary socialism taking hold in England. And so we've argued a few possibilities, right? Conservative ideas through Burke. We've argued, you put forward the monarchy, which I don't know too much about how able the monarchy, but I connected that, I suppose, to conservative ideas. And then, but this other thing that the Bernstein's really saying is that people are getting wealthier, the workers are getting wealthier, so that's what's stopping it. So we'll go on now to the next question, which is here: how can Bernstein argue that the emergence of capitalist prosperity is a step towards socialism? This seems like taking credit when another theory proves more accurate. I'm sort of inclined to agree with you, and I'm sort of inclined as well to say, oh, you agree with Bernstein, right? So, let me explain all that. What I'm seeing then is, like, Bernstein's argument is that, look, orthodox Marxism as being touted by Engels, right? And Marxism as written by Marx. Well, it's more complicated than that in a second, but let's take this as a starting point. So, orthodox Marxism, that Marxism that's been, remember, ossified, right, solidified by Engels, right, that Engels is preaching, that's wrong. It's been proven wrong, right? Been proven wrong for those reasons we mentioned earlier, that the workers are not being immiserated. Capital is not being concentrated in fewer and fewer hands. That's the evidence. We have evidence for that. Right? Very solid evidence from tax records in Germany. So that's not happening. So yeah, we're definitely disagreeing then with that theory. But Bernstein's still putting forward some sort of a socialism. It's an evolutionary socialism as opposed to revolutionary socialism. And the basis of it is this: look, if capitalism isn't being concentrated in every few hands, and if the workers are not being immiserated, in fact, what's happening is workers are fighting and they're forming unions and they are improving their working conditions. Then the sort of socialism we have now, for Bernstein, his form of socialism is a little bit different from Marx's, right? We're not all of a sudden one day going to wake up and overthrow the capitalist system and install a dictatorship of the proletariat and institute socialism. That's not going to happen. It's not going to happen in that discrete way, right? Where today we're a capitalist system, tomorrow, and I'm saying today or tomorrow, but I'm really just only trying to emphasize the discreteness of it. We won't move from a discrete capitalist system to a discrete socialist system. Of course, not even Marx thinks it's going to take one day. Of course not, right? It's going to take several. Well, it's going to take a lot of time. But but Marx still has this movement from one stage to another stage, discrete stages. Bernstein's saying actually it's going to be more of an imperceptible sort of movement towards socialism, right? The incremental movement towards socialism, so incremental that we might not even see that it's happening, and it won't happen all in one, but it'll happen with all these several processes, these several battles, and several wins for the workers across in Parliament, right? So even this is another difference, right? Using the current system, the current political system, we'll still be using the current political system, and so it won't look like we've really moved. But capitalism will just ebb into socialism. It'll just ebb into it. And so, yeah, that is I suppose I agree with you, it's another theory. But because the goals are roughly the same, because the agents that we're talking about here are the same, right? We're still talking about, Benson's still talking about the working class. He's still talking about sort of a more class consciousness, right? Sort of trade union consciousness, but class consciousness. He's still talking about capitalism, right? And capitalists as a block to socialists, to the working class. The goals that Marx is talking about in terms of workers owning more and more of their product and living in more and more of an equal society for them. Maybe even workers taking over the system, right? Those goals are still the same goals, right? So we're still in socialism, I think, with Bernstein. I think it's fair to say we're still in socialism. We still have the same goals, we still have the same agent, we still have the same obstacles, right? In that triadic model of freedom. But we're saying this, it's going to happen in a different way than what Marx says. So, yeah. Capitalist prosperity. And I suppose that the difference is, well, yeah. I mean, is Bernstein a capitalist here? And I think there's a really good piece, part of this Bernstein reading, actually, that sort of fits in with this question, right? And fits in with this idea of being a capitalist. And it's when he's talking about, it's a really strong argument, I think. But it's when he's talking about the capital in that German city, which I think, I'm going to keep saying it's Stuttgart because that's what I think it is, and I haven't got it in front of me, but he's talking about one of the German cities. And he says, people are, those with a large amount of capital, that the number of people with a large amount of capital is growing, it's not shrinking. And he says, look, if as Marx, so Marx says, right, that this number will shrink, and the shrinking number will add to the immiseration of the proletariat, and that will spark the revolution. So he says, if we believe in that, right, then surely what the workers should be supporting is the concentration of capital in fewer and fewer and fewer hands, because that is the surest way to get to our goal of a socialist revolution, of a workers' revolution. So I think when he says that, to me, that's quite a powerful argument, because of course it's probably difficult to think of it being in the proletariat, right, as set up by Karl Marx, right? This proletariat, it's difficult to see it to be in their interests to become more and more immiserated, right? Hey, we want to concentrate capital in fewer hands, and we want to become more and more immiserated, because the more immiserated we become, the closer we get to the revolution. It seems like the proletariat actually might not want to do that, right? It seems like they might want to improve their situation, right? They might want to improve their lot. And so in the current system, right, the 19th century, or probably even now, right, remember Russell Kirk says that we haven't really changed the system, we haven't had a revolution since 1790, so yeah, we want to improve our lot, and we'll improve it piece by piece, and we'll improve it just within the current political system by electing our people into parliament, right, by forming trade unions and by fighting like that, and we'll incrementally bring socialism. So I think, again, still socialism, but it is absolutely different theory, and one that to me makes a little bit more sense, right, in that because of what I just said, because of what Bernstein said, right, that workers don't want to immiserate themselves. They don't want to concentrate capital in fewer and fewer hands. What they want to do is to improve their own standing a little bit more. Okay, so let's go to the next one. It says, Bernstein's argument is almost entirely based on Marx's writings and statements made by other socialist thinkers. Was this unique, or was there a mentality that Marx and others were prophets of socialism? And I think that is exactly what we want, how we want to read Bernstein. We want to read him as a student of Marx, as a critic of Marx, right? Who sees problems and mistakes. You know, not necessarily mistakes that Marx wasn't. You know, he definitely has a lot of praise for Marx. I think he says in the reading that we did, I think he says that Marx is, you know, it's not every generation that produces a Marx, right? So he holds Marx up on a fairly high pedestal as an intellectual, as a scientist, as somebody who we should be reading, but he sees that the time has proven some of Marx's predictions wrong, right? And so we have to adjust socialism to go along with that. And then you have Engels, right, who is sort of battling with, and maybe more followers of Engels, right, who are saying, no, we have to rigidly stick to Marx. What Marx wrote and what he said, that's the truth. And we'll deal with that a little bit more in a second. So yeah, absolutely, this is based on Marx. Post-Marx socialism, it's very hard to talk about socialism without linking it back to Marx. Any of these socialist thinkers have to have read Marx and have to be critiquing Marx and have to have answers for Marx. The ones that come after Marx, obviously the ones that come before couldn't really do that. Next question: if there is no clear goal or ultimate aim, at what point do they reach contentment? This is a very good question for Bernstein. What is the stopping point? And if there's not one, when is the ultimate aim finally achieved? What is Bernstein trying to say? That the ultimate aim is not utopianism, but is also not generally a goal. Well, yeah, I think that's a good question. That would be a good discussion. I wish we were together and could discuss that. I'd like to ask you what you think about that, right? What do you think the end goal is? And I think, because I think this is the biggest distinction, right? And it goes back to what we were saying before about the discreteness, right? We know in Marx's writing, we know that we move from a capitalist system to a communist system. We know that we go from, that we have a immiseration, and then we have a big revolution, and after the revolution, we've got a workers' dictatorship. And it seems like we'd be able to tell the difference between capitalism and a workers' dictatorship. That seems quite stark, especially and then of communism, right? When communism comes and the state withers away. These different points along the revolutionary line, there's different systems. They're very different, right? And we couldn't mistake one for the other, right? We know when we're in one, we know when we're in the other. But for Bernstein, we really don't. We really won't find that out because it is so gradual. And we'll eventually, I think, find ourselves in the same spot. I think it's the same goal. I think we'll eventually find ourselves in communism. But I think the length of time, the number of steps, they're very micro steps, very small increments. And so when we've gone from one point to the other, from capitalism to socialism, it's much less easy to tell. if we were together, I might ask you the question like, are we already in a socialist society? You know, do we already live in a workers' paradise? How far away are we from that? Right, and if we compare from 200 years ago, right, from 1820 to 2020, you know, if we studied the history there, we might see act by act, if we just, let's say, concentrate on one country, if we just concentrate on Britain or on the United States, right, we might see that act by act, law by law, especially in Britain, you know, in America it was a little bit more tumultuous. You had, you know, the Civil War, but in Britain, especially, you might see, you know, act by act, step by step, law by law, government by government, more and more concessions being made to workers. And so, you know, at what point do we get, and I accept, right, that much of the news that we hear, right, from the UK is about 0-hour contracts, and it's about going backwards, and yeah, there might be some backwards movement, right, because it wouldn't be a straight, you know, it might not be a straight line. You know, there'll be some ups and downs, but I think ultimately, is there a working class whose lot is improving towards a point where they own much more of what they produce? But I guess even if you say no to that question, right, you could still be with Bernstein, right, because you could say, yeah, there's still a lot more to do, and then if you think that, yeah, there's a lot more to do, and we'll do it incrementally, and we'll do it through the existing structures, right, the existing political structures, bit by bit, piece by piece, union by union, you know, factory by factory. Factories are maybe not as important today, right? But you know, office by office, factory by factory, we'll law by law, we'll eventually get there. We'll make things better and better and better. But, you know, and maybe for Bernstein there isn't a communist stage to get to. Maybe there isn't that final stage. Maybe it's some sort of an eternal progression or something like that. Like where, you know, it's always improving. There's always room for a little bit more for the work. There's always room for a little bit more. But as long as we're heading in that direction, then we're socialists. Maybe for Bernstein. Whereas the critique of Bernstein, of course, from maybe supporters of Engels, and Engels especially, but also maybe perhaps supporters from Marx, is that, you know, that's trade union consciousness. That's a lie that the capitalist system are telling you, right, to slow down and to prevent a workers' revolution. They're telling you lies, right? We could have a new world. But we could only have a new world if we're all get rid of this false consciousness about it being in our interests to play within the system. This system's rigged against us. We can't do it. We can't get out. We can't improve the system. We've got to replace it with an old one. With a new one. So that's the critique, right? But so there is two sides to this, right? There is the Engels position and the Bernstein position, and they are different. I'm still answering that last question about the different theory, because yes, it is. But yeah, it's a good question. I think this would be a question that we'd all have to answer for ourselves. At what point do they reach contentment? When are they done? When have the workers got enough? When have they got their fair share? And that might differ depending on who you talk to. In this piece about evolutionary socialism, Eduard Bernstein talks a lot about the scaffolding of socialism, and I was confused by what he means by that. I want to finish here. Right? I want to finish up with this question. Because this was maybe the third big thing that I got out of the reading, and that I wanted you to get out of the reading, right, was this idea of Marx and the relationship between Marx and Bernstein. Because Bernstein's reading Marx and he's pointing us to capital, to the work of Marx, right? He's pointing us to that work in this reading. And he's trying to claim some support from Marx, right, for his own position. And the way he does this is he talks about a dualism in one of the chapters, and he says, yeah, Marx is, he says, yeah, some people say that Marx is dismissing all of this progress that the workers are making, dismissing it as ultimately it's going to come to nothing. We're still going to have an immiserated proletariat, and we're still going to have a revolution. And he says, yeah, I accept that you can read it like that. I can see how you're reading it like that. But he says, here's how I'm reading it, and I think that I can also read it in this way. And the way that he thinks he's reading it right is that is that his incremental socialism is correct, that we can make improvements. Right, the fact that Marx is already saying in Capital, he's writing that we can make improvements, that we have made improvements. He's accepting that we can make improvements. Right, and so I'm saying, hey, let's make more of those improvements. Right, and surely Marx wouldn't disagree with me, right? And remember again, right, if he doesn't disagree with me, it's a bit of a strange situation where Marx is telling us that we shouldn't, that we should try and immiserate the proletariat, right, which seems wrong to Bernstein. Right? So to illustrate that a little bit, and then he's basing his theory on Marx, and he wants to find support for his theory in Marx. So that's important, and that helps us answer that question that we've already answered. The next thing to say is he now critiques Marx as well. He says this. He says he's talking about the scaffolding, and he says, look. One of the things that Marx does is he refers back to the Communist Manifesto, and he says, because he keeps referring back to the Communist Manifesto is fairly, it has those discrete stages, right? And it has the how are we going to move from one stage to the other. And he says, that seems to me to be the scaffolding. That seems to be a blueprint that Marx has. That he thinks we're really going to go through those stages. And it's exactly the stages that we talked about in class that now 2 weeks ago, 2 or 3 weeks ago. We drew it on the board, those different steps. So, and you can find that in the textbook if you've forgotten it. So he says, yeah, he keeps referring back to that. And so this is the scaffolding that he's talking about. The other thing that Marx does is he wants to really write about things as they are. He wants to be a scientist. He wants to take in data, and he wants to analyze the data and sort of chart the progress of capitalism. The problem that Bernstein thinks that Marx has is that because he's already got this scaffolding, he's already got this structure set up, he's already got this path set up, so that now he's building this building within the scaffold. Right? So the building that he's building, that represents the science that he's doing, right? The tracking of capitalism, of the progress in different countries, what capitalism's doing, right? Who is it making rich, who is it making poor, that sort of thing. How is it growing the sort of class of capitalists? Is it shrinking the proletariat, or is it growing the proletariat, right? Which is what Marx thinks it should be doing. But as he's tracking this, he realizes, according to Bernstein, that he's building this building within the scaffolding, this scientific building. And he realizes as he's building the science that, oh, that's not going to fit in the scaffolding that I've got. That's not going to fit in with the Communist Manifesto. It's not going to fit into these stages. So now I need to sort of chop that bit off. Right? I need to chop that bit of the building off. I need to, so basically Bernstein thinks that Marx is restricting himself, constricting himself. He has the brilliance, he has the intellect, and he has the inclination, Bernstein thinks of Marx, that Marx has this inclination to be scientific and to consider new data, but where it doesn't fit in with his sort of grand scheme, he wants to chop it and form it in strange ways and push it in ways that it doesn't really want to go. So that's the idea of the scaffolding, and the important thing there is, again, that Bernstein is building on Marx. He has some critiques of Marx that are important critiques, and those critiques of Marx he uses as a way to, I think he thinks, to rescue socialism from like a dead philosophy of Marx that Engels is putting forward. So that should be a fairly good start on any kind of a paper that you would write about this. Definitely, this is just sort of restricted to that one first reading, so I'll do another couple of recordings this week. Not sure how long I went on for there, but we've got a good few questions there. I hope it was helpful. I hope these videos are helpful, and I'll see you next time.